From the Federalist employment of a war scare with France to strong-arm the Alien and Sedition Acts through Congress in 1798 to the present administration's invocation of so-called state secrets to fend off legal challenges to its practice of, quote-unquote, rendering prisoners to countries that routinely use torture to extract information, the invocation of national security to justify repression has been a constant feature of this nation's history. The supposed dangers that justify the repression have invariably been widely exaggerated. And here I really struggled to find a counterexample. And I did, I found one. And that was Lincoln's revocation of habeas corpus at a time when Confederate sympathizers in Maryland were threatening to cut off Washington, D.C. in the early years of the Civil War. But that was the only time I could find in which the threat to the United States was serious enough to temporarily restrict people's rights. In every other case, the violations of human rights and civil liberties turned out to be both unjust and unnecessary. In some cases, the authorities cracked down on specific groups and individuals because they genuinely feared that they would undermine the nation's unity or somehow betray it to its enemies. But all too often, the perpetrators of this repression had other agendas as well. Thus, for example, in the aftermath of Pearl Harbor and of 9/11, the federal government took repressive actions, I think in part because it wanted to appear decisive and in control of the situation. That the Roosevelt administration's relocation of the Japanese Americans from the West Coast was also a response to pressure from big-time California vegetable growers to eliminate their main competitors is also part of the story. Nevertheless, and this is significant, this clearly egregious and racist violation of individual rights was justified in the language of national security as necessary to protect the nation against espionage and sabotage. I think is probably the most significant aspect of it. The rest of the country, including Congress, the Supreme Court, and the majority of the ACLU's leadership went along with it. No one was killed. And this is another important feature of American political repression. Unlike Hitler's concentration camps, Stalin's purges, or the disappearances staged by Latin America's authoritarian regimes in the 1970s and 1980s, political repression in the United States, at least for the past 100 years, has been largely accomplished without bloodshed. Two major exceptions: the labor wars of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as well as the violence against African Americans in the South during and after Reconstruction. These are major exceptions and cannot be overlooked. Still, as the efficacy of blacklisting during the McCarthy era has revealed, eliminating challenges to the political status quo does not require the use of force, nor does it require going beyond the law. Political repression in the United States is, with only a few exceptions, entirely legal. And in many cases, it is the law. Especially when faced with an ostensible emergency, the nation's lawmakers have been all too willing to overlook constitutional restrictions, and as they just did with regard to the Patriot Act and the even worse Military Commissions Act, enact legislation that seriously compromises individual rights. And, for the most part, the nation's judges have been equally willing to accommodate them. Though the establishment of an independent judiciary was theoretically designed to prevent the illegitimate use of power, that has rarely happened. Instead, The judicial branch has almost always signed off on whatever repressive actions the public or private authorities have taken. And in some cases, such as the late 19th and early 20th century injunctions against strikes, the judiciary has actually taken the initiative. We need to recognize, therefore, that despite all the trappings of constitutionalism, the American authorities use repression against those whom they consider a threat whenever other methods for obtaining a consensus do not work. And they are able to do this because the rest of the nation's political and economic establishment supports what they are doing, even though it's active collaboration, supports what they are doing, either through its active collaboration or else more passively by simply not doing anything to stop it. Now, rather than spelling out all the ways in which this can be done, I'm going to turn the program over to our other panelists who will, I trust, help us understand how political repression affects some very important sectors of American society. And so,